What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the fifth and final round from the Riley's Retro 2010 tournament from NAIC. And it was actually a clean cut into top 8. And all of the players decided to split the prizing and not actually play out top 8. So fortunately, I was able to get Ryan and Nick here to agree to play a game for the sake of the stream, for the sake of the content. So we're going to see Ryan on the left playing Gardevoir up against Nick on the right playing Gyarados. And this Gyarados is a little bit different than the one we saw last round. Not too many notable changes other than that Rapidash, but we'll see how this one plays out. Nick starting with that Sableye, so going to be able to go first, can use Impersonate to go ahead and get Collector or something like that to get set up. Again, we saw the power of that Sableye in the last round with Philip's Gyarados deck. We see the Crobat G come down with a Flash Bite and an Uxie set up for 1 or 2, looks like. Run 2 cards. Now again, can't play any trainers on this opening turn, but can use the Impersonate to search out a supporter and use that as the effect of this Sableye's attack. Looks like Nick went with the Pokemon Collector, so we'll see what is chosen off of this. Most likely going to be some combination of Magikarp and support Pokemon. Y'all know how this Gyarados deck likes to run at this point, so I won't go too deep into it. But the matchup itself, this matchup against Gardevoir, is very interesting and usually ends up hinging around Expert Belt. Both sides of this matchup really want to make use of Expert Belt. From Ryan's standpoint, the Gardevoir maxes out at 60 damage, and then you can add in that 20 damage with an Expert Belt to push the Psychic Lock into a 2-shot range. Since, of course, if it's just doing 60 times 2, that's only hitting 120. Not going to be enough to knock out the 130 HP Gyarados. Now, on the other side of that, the Expert Belt from Gyarados can also be important to push the Gyarados out of a 2-shot range if Gardevoir doesn't find the Expert Belt the first time you use Psychic Lock. So it's this really back and forth interaction of when you find your Expert Belts and if you're able to use those to push Pokemon into 2-shot range. And this is also going to play out with Ryan being able to lock Nick out of abilities, or excuse me, Pokepowers. Much like the Mesprit from last round, this one just has the attack of the Gardevoir just locks your opponent out of Pokepowers on the following turn. And I think Ryan went to use a Baby Search here, didn't put a card back. So Baby Search does require you to put a card from your hand on top of your deck. You don't actually have to reveal what the card is, but now you can go search out a Pokemon, put it into your hand. And Ryan definitely wanted to start with the Spiritomb here. Spiritomb is really important in this matchup. You see the Spiritomb right in the middle there. And Spiritomb using Darkness Grace allows you to kind of cheat the evolution rule of the game. You can use a free attack, much like that Sableye's Impersonate. It is a free attack, lets you search your deck for a Pokemon and evolve one of your bench Pokemon into that Pokemon straight away. So if you have like a Baltoy or a Ralts down, you can evolve into a Claydol or a Kirlia, something like that. And then it puts a damage counter on itself. Not too much of a drawback. You kind of just sit there and use it the whole time you're setting up your board. But the biggest thing about it is that while it's active, it has a Poke Body that neither player can play any effectively item cards, what would be considered item cards in today's game. And that is really impactful. It locks both players out of it, but you can also just use that Darkness Grace to set up your board. So unfortunate that Ryan did not get that going here. And I think we're actually just using the first attack on this Ralts to rearrange the top 5 cards of Ryan's own deck. That doesn't feel right to me. It doesn't feel like the correct choice. And you also expose this Call Energy. You don't really want to put the only energy you have in play on the active Pokemon where it can be knocked out by a Tail Revenge. And the Guardy does require 3 energy to attack. It requires Psychic double colorless to use Psychic Lock. So I think kind of exposing, obviously the call energy doesn't really benefit you since it is just one of the colors, so you can't just go like psychic plus a DCE, you know, you need another attachment at this point with the call energy, but you still want to have energy in play. It's still pretty important. I don't know if Ryan plays Lucian's assignment or anything like that, but yeah, you definitely don't want to expose this Ralts regardless. Would have been nice to get a Spiritomb and just retreat off the call energy into a Spiritomb. But anyway, Nick's going to go forward with their turn. Now, I did want to point out, since both players have actually used Azel's Time Walk, there's kind of a gentleman's agreement, more or less, kind of like house rules, where once you look at your prizes, Azelf does not actually require you to shuffle your prizes, so these players could have just written down their prizes at this point. You're going to be seeing them pick up all of their prizes at once and kind of pick which card they take, so both players kind of have that understanding that, yeah, I would have just written down my prize cards, and in this instance, it's just makes it a lot faster for players to just look at them when they take the prize, since it amounts to the same thing. And Nick's going to go through, did get a Felicity's drawing this turn to discard, I would assume, some Magikarps, and got at least one bench, and I think we're seeing the Impersonate now. So looks like Impersonate for the Pokemon Collector, and we see the Mesprit in this list. So it's very funny how last round Mesprit was kind of the bane of Gyarados' existence, and now this Gyarados is choosing to play a Mesprit of its own. And I believe this is probably just I think it was Seniors. This Gyarados deck won Worlds in 2010. And this is probably the Seniors list if I had to guess, which did play one copy of that Psychic Bind Mesprit and Super Scoop Ups and things like that, so you could reuse it. And Ryan does get down the Spiritomb onto their turn, and a double colorless down, so already a pretty good start. You'd love to get a Curlia or something going, and you really want to be able to get the Psychic Bind this turn if you can. It's interesting Nick chose not to bench the Luxray. So another thing that's actually pretty significant in this matchup can be Dusknoir. So we have not seen that in any of our matches so far with the Dark Palm. And if your opponent has 4 or more bench Pokemon, you can shuffle one of their bench Pokemon and all cards attached to it into their deck. And I think Nick might be trying to play around that. Ryan did have a bench spot open at the start of the turn, so maybe thinking to play around that and not wanting to overextend on bench space, or maybe just leaving a spot open for Uxie. And we did see the Curlia, and I believe we saw a search for that Gallade, which is another card that could be pretty big in this matchup. Gallade being able to take the knockout. Oh, I think it didn't discard the Beyblades. I think that was the issue there, but got it in the discard pile, no problem. And yeah, the Gallade is going to be pretty significant in this matchup, since it is one of the few ways that this Gardevoir deck has to one-shot a Gyarados. It does require you to flip over your face-down prize cards and reveal them, and then it does 20 more damage for each prize card that you've revealed. And then I think it's 60 base as well. So if you flip over, you know, a bunch of your prize cards, you can knock out a Gyarados in one shot. Gyarados does also resist fighting, which is pretty unfortunate for Ryan. And it's a funny interaction of, like, sometimes you have to choose which card, since you've looked at your face down prize cards with Time Walk, you actually have to choose which cards you want to reveal, because obviously your opponent can now see that you have certain cards prized. And you might want to withhold information that, oh, I have maybe like my one copy of this card prized or something. So it's a very funny little nuance there of which cards do you want your opponent to know you have prized. And then you can take the cards that were already flipped over or something, or take the ones that are face down so they don't know what you take off the prizes. All kinds of big brain plays that this Gallade brings into the mix. But definitely not the desired attacker more than maybe the one big one shot on a Gyarados, since you do want to be locking Nick out of powers with this Psychic Lock. And one thing we haven't even touched on yet that is amazing about this Gardevoir card is its Pokepower Telepass, which allows you to choose a supporter card in your opponent's discard pile and use the effect of it. And that is not actually playing your supporter. You get to just use the effect of one of your opponent's supporters and then You get to play your own supporter still, so it's a very, very strong card. You can only use one telepass per turn, so it's a little bit balanced, but it is probably the strongest Poke Power, arguably at least, in this format. And we'll get to that at some point. You know, players definitely want to be very selective with what cards they're discarding, what supporters are discarding, so that your opponent can't necessarily abuse. Like, you never want to give a Gardevoir deck Judge or something like that if you can avoid it, since they can end every turn with a Judge down to 4. We saw a pretty big turn from Nick here, so did use the Regimove from that Regice on the bench to move the Spiritomb onto the bench, which did free Nick from the item lock, and took a knockout with that Gyarados going down to 5 prizes. And the Regimove is a really good addition to this Gyarados deck, since you're able to discard Magikarps. So you have to discard 2 cards to use its power, and it's another way of discarding Magikarps and also just thinning out your deck at a certain point. And we saw the Telepass for the Felicity's drawing. So once again, you saw the point of the discard pile, and I'm going to use your supporter, but Ryan does still have a supporter. And this is a really interesting choice, the Unknown G on the active. So as I mentioned, the Expert Belt is really significant in this matchup, and Ryan chose to put the Unknown G on the Gardevoir. I don't believe there's really anything that's going to have any impact on in this matchup. I guess if Nick ever wanted to lock up and played a random Psychic Energy or something, it would prevent the inability to retreat or something. There's really not a nuance where that would ever come up that I can see. And it just means that you can't attach that Expert Belt now. So interesting choice. Maybe just wanted to thin it out, but at that rate you could just put it on anything else that's not a Ralts or a Gardevoir. So I'm not really sure what that's all about, but did at least get a candy into the Gallade and then retreated off the DCE. So once again, just losing energy in play, and committed the Call Energy to the Spiritomb in order to get down a Baltoy. So Ryan definitely needing to kind of take some time to establish that draw engine in the Claydol. I'm not sure what the 1 card in hand is. We do have the Telepass from Gardevoir though, so might be able to just use that to draw some more cards next turn and hopefully find that Claydol regardless. I think Nick has a Bebe Search in the discard pile, so might be able to just use that. And then a pretty quick turn from Nick, just took the knockout on the Spiritomb and went down to 4 prizes. So, and there's the Claydol, so that's pretty good. We see the Cosmic Power first. And yeah, you can always kind of choose between, do you want to use Cosmic Power, or do you want to use a search card like Collector off that Telepass? You have so many options with this Gardevoir deck, and this is why it's one of the strongest archetypes in this format. And still looking for some energy. It doesn't get the Moonlight Stadium down, so this will give all Dark and Psychic Pokemon free retreat, which is actually kind of nice because Nick can use that to retreat Azelf and Uxie on the bench. I think actually everything on Nick's bench except for Regice now has free retreat, which is hilarious. And you see the Duskull and then the Dusknoir. So the Duskull actually has I think it's just an item or something like that. It's called, where it's not like an ability, it's almost like an ancient trait or something, where it has Reaper Claw, so you can actually evolve immediately into that Dusclops the turn that you play it. So that's why you saw Ryan playing right into that Dusclops. And this is what I was talking about that Dusknoir. So Nick filled their bench, does have 5 Pokemon in play, so this Dark Palm could put a Pokemon on Nick's bench back into the deck. I don't think it's going to be super impactful in this matchup necessarily in this instance. There's really, like, Nick's bench is entirely support Pokemon, so there's really nothing that you want to put back. I guess maybe you could put back, like, the Sableye on a turn that you judge or something and hope that they can't just find a supporter. You know, the Sableye gives them an out to the supporter or something. Not sure that it's going to be super relevant, but we'll see how it plays out. And we see the Regimove. I think Ryan just passed it with the attachment of the DCE down to that Gallade. So setting up for a big knockout with Sonic Blade. I forget, there's 2 attacks. I can't remember which one is which, but Psycho Cut or something maybe. And the Regimove here forces up the Nidoran. So this is pretty rough for Ryan. So another thing that Ryan really wanted to do in this matchup is use Nidoqueens. Oh god, I'm putting myself on the spot with the power. I cannot remember the name off the top of my head. But it heals 10 damage from all of your Pokemon between turns, and I guess what would have been Pokemon Checkup, but it wasn't called that quite yet. And that would heal effectively 20, right? Because your opponent, you heal 10 from their turn to your turn, and then 10 more going back into their turn. So before they're able to kind of use another attack, you effectively heal 20, which is really important because this Gardevoir with an Expert Belt can't get one shot by a Gyarados in any circumstance, unless there's like a Bucks training or something, I guess. But yeah, there's really not, and this again goes back to the Unknown G being attached to this Gardevoir. I still don't really understand the decision, the logic behind that, but maybe Ryan's playing around something I'm not thinking of. But at any rate, we do see a Psychic Energy and an Expert Belt on this Gallade. So this Gallade now should be able to take a one-shot on the active Gyarados, but you're now committing so much to this Gallade, and I think it might be, there's a Judge, so I'm not sure if we've already used Telepass, but this is a really good way to kind of come back in this game from Ryan's standpoint. This would have been great to combo with something like that Psychic Lock from Gardevoir. Of course, that wouldn't have taken a knockout, but being able to take the knockout here with this Gallade after a Judge, this is definitely what Ryan wants to do to come back in this game. You're down 3 prizes. You're about to stick a 2-prize Expert Belted Pokemon in the active. So it's a little bit scary of a situation to be in, but this is kind of your ticket back into the game using that Judge. Hopefully your opponent doesn't draw out of it. You can force them to miss a turn. And yeah, here we see the, I don't remember if it's Psycho Cut. I think it's Psycho Cut is the Gallade's attack. So we can see all the prizes here. Again, we did have that kind of house rule with the Azolf. So the 4 prizes being flipped over, the Expert Belt kind of effectively neutralizing the resistance. So those kind of zero each other out. And then the additional the additional 80 damage to push it up to 140 and take the knockout on the Gyarados. And yeah, we have those 4 face-up prizes, 1 face-down prize, and Ryan finally takes the first prize of the game. And Nick's gonna go ahead and use Combee's Honey, which gets a Pokemon from the discard pile directly to the bench, grab that Magikarp back, and a Super Scoop up. And it's Tails. Not sure what we would have been, maybe the Uxie seems like the most important thing. And wow, we're just going to see the Impersonate for the Cynthia's Feelings. And this is a supporter card that if one of your Pokemon was knocked out during your last turn, you can shuffle, draw 8 cards. Really, really strong supporter in this Gyarados deck, since, you know, you are often giving up some of your support Pokemon as prizes. You can just have this one up. And in this instance, you can search it out with Impersonate. This is a little bit scary because you now give that supporter to Ryan with these of Telepass. And like I mentioned, you want to be very selective with which supporters you use against a Gardevoir deck, because they can just effectively just take those supporters and use them. So that could be something that Ryan uses in the future, using Judge, your own, you're playing your own supporter for the turn, Judge to put Nick down to 4 cards, and then Telepass for Cynthia's Feelings to shuffle draw up to 8. So you just judge your opponent, but it becomes like a one-sided judge, which is really strong. And Ryan was able to buy back that turn of tempo with the Judge and the big knockout. So this is kind of what I was saying previously, that Ryan really wanted to combine that Judge. If you could have taken a KO with the Psychic Lock as well, that would have been huge to turn off the access to things like Uxie, but it didn't actually end up mattering. And this is actually it's a funny play, the Dark Palm, to put the Magikarp back in the deck from that Dusknoir. So now Nick's going to have to find that Magikarp again, because it's buried back into the deck, and there still is no broken time space in play. I'm not sure if Nick is intentionally not playing it, giving access to broken time space to a Guardy deck can definitely be scary, you know, but most of Ryan's board is evolved and developed at this point, so I'm not sure it's really an issue anymore. Didn't quite see what that supporter was. Might have been a Telepass for Felicities. Did draw 3 cards, so I think it was a Telepass for Felicities there. And the Psychic Energy comes down, so we can finally use Psychic Lock. I don't agree with the KO from the Gallade here. I think preserving this Pokemon with the Expert Belts where it's not taking damage might have been a little bit better, and also using Psychic Lock I think would have been a little bit more impactful to take out the Sableye, because then your opponent can't use things like Uxie, can't use any Poke Powers. I mean, Nick does have a large hand, would have had 9 after the draw for turn, since that Cynthia's Feelings drew up to 8 kind of to end the turn. And I think the Collector just to get the Magikarp feels pretty bad when you're like 12 turns deep into this game and you have to go be like, I'm gonna go get my Magikarp back. And but now we want to find that Broken Time Space from Nick. But yeah, I definitely would have liked to see the Psychic Bind come into play there, perhaps. I mean, I guess it's possible that this Gallade just does not get knocked out. I think it has 150 HP at this point with that Expert Belt. I guess 140 with the 10 already on it. So it should be relatively safe. I just think that you're down to only 3 prizes remaining for Nick, and you kind of want to force that to be 3 knockouts and maybe save this Gallade to come in at the end as just another attacker. So I'm not entirely sure I like that play, but we'll see. And we did find the Broken Time Space, which is huge. Interesting, we saw the Warp Energy used instead of just retreating before playing the Broken Time Space. You could have actually made use of that Moonlight Stadium, but it doesn't matter. With the Warp Energy, it does force the switch. That's why Nick did not actually have to discard. It actually forces you to switch to the bench. So keeping the energy around might end up being better. Being able to have that in play gives you a free pivot on the following turn. Anyway, so... And oh, did Ryan not have Ryan might not have actually had the energy. I thought there was energy on that Gardevoir, but I might have just been going through that whole thing without enough energy on there. So my bad if that were the case. But regardless, I think the big problem from Ryan this match has definitely been a lack of Psychic Lock. This is a Gardevoir deck, believe it or not, and we have yet to see a single Psychic Lock. So my point stands regardless of if it were possible or not. I definitely would have liked to have seen the Psychic Lock at some point in this game. And we see what's lovingly called the menu with the 3 supporters laid out. Those are the 3 different supporter cards that Gardevoir's Telepass can choose from. So we some friends of mine and I like to call it the menu for Gardevoir. So I'm not sure which one was chosen from Ryan here, but definitely want to get this Gallade out if you can. You're not able to take a KO with it. This thing is kind of your big lose condition. Maybe it was a Cynthia's Feelings. We're drawing a lot of cards here. But a knockout wasn't taken, so it might have been a Felicities, perhaps? Oh no, here's the Telepass, so I'm not... maybe it was a Cosmic Power? Completely missed whatever Ryan was doing, but able to draw a ton of cards. You have Cosmic Power, you have Telepass, plus your own supporter, so Ryan can just continually draw cards. Oh, and I really don't like this. So just choosing to hit with this Gallade, you're flipping over 1 prize card, so it's only going to do 80 damage. The Expert Belt, neutralizing that resistance. And I think at this point, so this actually was a pretty long game. I'm not sure if you noticed all the jump cuts I had to make, but this was a pretty long game. The players kind of taking a lot of time between their actions to figure out the best course of action and navigate the turns. But I did actually put a die out there marking. So Nick is actually turn 0. And as I mentioned in previous video, the player who is ahead on prizes at the end of 3 additional turns would be the winner. So Nick gonna go down to 1 prize with a knockout on this active Gallade. Should be pretty much guaranteed to win the game. Ryan would have to take, as long as Nick doesn't put any like Expert Belt down or something like that, Ryan should not have any way to win the game. that I can possibly see. I think Nick has way too many cards in deck to deck out, so Nick should have this one on lock as long as there is the knockout on the active, taking the 2 prizes from the expert belt. But again, these players, as I mentioned, were playing this one out for stream, and I was very appreciative of that. So definitely going to see them finish this one out and, show off their decks, get to enjoy the moment in the limelight, if I can call it that. And there's the knockout on the Gallade. Going down to 1 prize, Nick just choosing which ones to take, and then we will see the promotion of the Gardevoir. And Spiritomb top deck, not gonna do much. I think we can even kind of go with the hypothetical here. Ryan is turn 1, but we could even see this if this one played out beyond those turns. Is there a way that Ryan could have come back into this? I think it would definitely have involved something like Judge. I'm not sure how many Ryan plays. The Looker's Investigation is another card that can be used to disrupt. It's not quite Judge. Your opponent does get, you can shuffle draw 5. You can choose either yourself or your opponent to shuffle draw 5, which is a very interesting card. And we saw the Telepass for the Cynthia's Feelings, and just the Psychic Lock. This Gardevoir level X does have additional HP as well, so this probably should not be getting knocked out. Actually, I think it's impossible as well, since the Psychic Lock will turn off Crobat's Flashbite, so I don't think there's a way that Nick can knock out the active Gardevoir here. Could just kind of go around it, take the final prize with something like a Warp Point, and evolve into a Gyarados. I don't actually know. I think the Dusknoir has 120 HP, so there's, as long as that is promoted off a potential Warp Point, I don't think there's a way that Nick could KO it or Ryan could lose on the spot. And again, we're kind of thinking about if this game had played out beyond the conclusion of the turns. We were waiting to get the result of this one so that, of course, we could pair top 8. I did have to confirm it was going to be a clean cut. I think there was actually another match or 2 playing at the time of this one, so we did not know for sure that this match would end up being irrelevant, but again, players want to play it out, and again, I appreciate that for the content. So looking to see what Nick can finish the turn with. Definitely want to find a Broken Time Space right as I say it, and a Gyarados. There it is. And a Warp Point could force something else out. I guess there's also the Gardevoir with the Expert Belt, so there shouldn't be a way for Nick to just outright win the game. Brings up the Gyarados with an Expert Belt and going to use that Tail Wrench for 110 damage. And turns pass to Ryan. So this is going to be the last turn of the game. In a longer game, I'm not sure if well, anyway, just going to concede from Ryan there. That is it for the 2010 Worlds Format Riley's Retro. As I said, it was a clean cut at the end of the day. Did not end up getting top 8 to showcase here, but got the 4 rounds from the tournament. Hope you all enjoyed them. Thank you so much for watching.